Oh, yeah. The NFL draft and rookies. Hell yeah. Oh, yeah,
Podcast off the rails already.
But there is not a chance in hell Justin Fields is finishing in the top 10.
You know what, Mikey? Shut it.
He wants
Why
it.
not?
You don't want the smoke.
He's Calvin Johnson. He's Calvin
Oh,
Johnson.
good.
Oh,
God.
my
Yes,
God.
yes, and yes.
What are we gonna do with you?
It just, it adds a little extra flavor to the podcast. I mean,
I think you're disrespecting David Njoku.
Thank God
Yeah.
for Joe Flacco. That's all I can say. I'll help the owners. Don't draft Kadarius Toney.
I have to give the people what they want. I mean, come on. I'm going to milk it. I'm going to milk it for all it's worth.
I'll give you something to milk.
Let's rock and roll.
Welcome to the MHA podcast. The season is over. We've crowned our champion. So why are we still here? Well, it's award season time here in the MHA. We're going to hand out some individual awards like the T.Y. Hilton Award, what the best move of the year was, what was the worst move of the season, and of course the most prestigious award of them all, the most valuable player in the MHA season. Eric Lansing, Todd Diamond, Mike Renault, and we're all in the same room.
Hey, that's something.
That's different. Do you guys remember the last time we did that?
Definitely the first time of the year.
Oh, for sure. I don't think we've done it
2000
in person since, obviously
Probably
I've moved, but since then, was it COVID year?
Pre-COVID year.
I don't recall.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
It's been a long time. It's easy to do it online because we're all busy. We're trying to find time to get together, and it's just easy to go online as opposed to getting together. Not that we don't get together a lot, but it's just like during the week and school year, it's busy. But we're here in person. We got the mixer going on. We got the headsets going on. And we're excited to bring you the MHA Awards. You guys ready? You excited for this? What award excites you the most to talk about, Miguel?
For me, it's MVP. That's the big boy. That's who contributed the most to their team and to the league, who made the biggest impact. So, yeah, MVP for me.
What about you, Todd?
Most surprising.
Okay.
Because I think if you have a player that you picked up or drafted and you're the only one that thought, this player is going to be great, and he just surprises everybody. It's kind of the like really, like it
sounded like a Tim Allen from Home Improvement.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Hey, that's my childhood right there. But yeah, the surprising one, because that's when you find the players like a surprising player that helped you, maybe whether it was the beginning of the season or you picked them up in the middle of the season or toward the end to help you win a championship. And I can name about two players that were kind of, I would say, that were surprising in MHA, years ago. I guess you want to say James Jones and Danny Woodhead, very surprising players. You're thinking, okay, James Jones was like the third wide receiver, Danny Woodhead, maybe the third running back that year, and helped you win a championship. So
these were all Todd's guys. I thought he was going to go Peyton Hillis.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Yeah, Peyton Hillis, yeah.
Super surprise. Helped you win a championship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he got himself on a Madden cover, and that's all the last we saw of him.
And the thing I'll say about for those who are Danny Woodhead fans, he's going into the College Hall of Fame.
Hey.
He's two-time Harlan Hill winner. And those who don't know who Harlan Hill is, he's the
not me.
the Harlan Hill Award is the equivalent of the Heisman in Division II, and he won it twice. And so he's going into the College Football Hall of Fame. So congratulations, Danny Woodhead, if you're listening, which probably not. All right, well, let's get into it. We're just kind of winging it. So we're here on this. It's Sunday. We watched the Broncos lose. Great season.
Yes.
Nothing to take away from the loss. It stunk, but this is where we are on Sunday. So now we kind of went over who our candidates were, who we picked as the award winner, and so we're just kind of going off the cuff here. There's not really a script except for the one I've already read to you. So we'll start with the T.Y. Hilton Award, and for those, everybody's been in the league for quite a while. You guys know what the T.Y. Hilton Award is at this point, but I'll let Mikey kind of explain what that award is to everyone else. Kind of give everybody a reminder what that award means. It's not a good thing,
Yeah, this award was given to the player who basically was started and played the most times when really they probably shouldn't have been because we're terrible.
Yes, indeed. And we have a few of those. I was surprised. Usually I figured it's going to be hard to find – our owners are pretty good. Were pretty consistent, but there was a lot of players that were started that, maybe probably should have found a replacement for this owner.
But also, too, I mean, let's face it, in fantasy football universe, yeah, the players shouldn't have been started as many times as it did. But, also, too, we all can be, stubborn and be like, no, I believe in this player. I'm going to keep –
Fair enough. Yeah.
So, that fantasy football makes you stubborn sometimes because you're just like, no, this player's going to – I'm going to beat this player into the ground. This is going to work, okay? I will not give up. I will not surrender.
And then you don't, and you never surrender, and then you're not in the playoffs either.
Yeah, and then you're,
so stubborn to the fact that I don't need to win. I just want to make sure this guy has one good week, so I don't look like an idiot at the end of the year.
That's a good. Yeah, that's
I don't know.
I
don't know.
It's a 50-50 shot.
Well, it's a fun award. It was one of those. We called it the T.Y. Hilton Award because there was that soundbite from Mikey. Because I don't remember who it was. I feel like it was Miles who kept starting T.Y. Hilton every week.
It was.
And Mikey, this frustration with him being started every week went to another level, and we made an award out of it. And that's exciting. So let's bring you the nominations for, and Mike, you're going to have to help me because I do not have Dalton Kincaid's numbers in front of me. But the candidates for the T.Y. Hilton Award for 2024 are Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, and Deebo Samuel. Kyle Pitts was started 13 times this season. Finished 16th amongst the tight ends. He only had 4 games of 10 or more points and had 0 double-digit totals in the final 5 weeks of the season. Dalton Kincaid, do you have that number? Or are you still looking that up? I can read Deebo while you're still looking if you are.
No, I've got it on it. I mean, Dalton Kincaid was somebody that I started, 8 times, and he contributed, 49 total points to my team, so he was pretty terrible.
But you believed in him, it sounded like.
I did. He only had 2 of those games that I played him that he was in double digits, so, yeah, pretty bad. And
then Deebo Samuel, he was started 13 times this season, finished 40th amongst wide receivers, 3 10-plus point games, and had 0 of those in the final 7 games of the season. And so the winner of the T.Y. Hilton Award in 2024 it's going to be Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel. He was drafted, I believe, in the 3rd round by Belt Sanders. And it was a tough season for the 49ers offensively already. But I felt like we all kind of had Deebo Samuel. It's always tough to – and when I was kind of talking about it in terms of Deebo Samuel's, this year was the year of the running back. There was more valuable running backs, or there was more running backs to choose from, and wide receivers not so much. And so what was Allen going to do anyway? He was probably going to start him because he didn't have a better option. But, 13 times, and he only had 3. He was highly touted. He's had some amazing seasons in the past, but he just never turned that corner. He was bad this year.
Yeah, and you would think, again, attached to a great offense – and
was a great offense.
Was a great offense. Yes, rephrase that. Was a great offense, but he's really. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey is the number one option, running back, wide receiver, and everything non-quarterback. But Deebo really is the number. We would think about as really the number one wide receiver, and just I don't know what it just. Kind of using language, but just shit the bed really bad. And that whole 49ers team, I think we can all agree, just
it was tough for them. Yeah, Deebo last year finished 13th. Last year had 60 receptions, 892 yards, 7 touchdowns, but he also had 5 rushing touchdowns. Led all wide receivers in red zone touches. I think there was a lot of expectations for the 49ers offense this year, but. I think the problem with Deebo, too, and we've talked about this in the past, but even for this year, he would start a game, get hurt a drive or 2 in, and then he would be gone for the rest of the game, which has got to be frustrating. And you can't control some of those type of things, but at some point, and that's why I'm never super high on him at the beginning of the year, because you're not sure what you're going to get from him. He's going to get hurt. Maybe they rely on Christian McCaffrey. He gets all the touchdowns, and then Ayuk's coming in this year as well, and then you have George Kittle, who had a really good year, and so it's for him to have that bad of a season, I think was surprising.
How much of it do you think had to do with Christian McCaffrey being hurt?
Sure.
And the reason I ask that is Deebo gets a lot of points from rushing, And, I mean, you just look at a big difference. So, like last year, he was averaging, 6 yards per carry on his runs. This year, he had 5 more runs, 42 attempts to 37, and averaged 3.2 yards a carry. So it's almost like the threat of McCaffrey not being in there just totally killed any and all rushing points that he was going to accumulate. And he's never been a big-time volume receiver anyway.
Correct, yeah.
And so if he doesn't get touchdowns, then you're kind of in the position that Allen was in this year where he's not giving you much.
Yeah, I think, but even without McCaffrey, and McCaffrey's McCaffrey, so maybe what I'm going to say is irrelevant, but Jordan Mason came in and did well. And then helped me out with a third guy named Gorindo.
Yeah.
Like, he came in and did well. So there's still opportunities for people to realize, well, we can't just focus on Debo. But if you're that good of a player, supposedly, if you're that good of a player, you should be able to still help with the offense and still pick up the slack. Now, Brock Purdy wasn't Brock Purdy of last year. I don't know if that's – I mean, obviously when McCaffrey's kind of out of the picture, it changes the dynamic of how you want to do things. But still, they're based on running and then passing off the running. And if you're that good of a player, they're going to figure that out. And, I mean, Ayuk went down with an injury, I don't know, week 6 or 7, whatever it was. So, I mean, that didn't help either. But that's just more targets. It's more attempts. And he still wasn't able to kind of pick up the slack.
Now, I will say this, and maybe this is something to look at for next year, but, I mean, Debo Samuel, he's played – was his 6th season. He's had 3 pretty good seasons, 3 pretty bad seasons.
I see what you're saying.
And it's always been every other year.
So next year, take him in the second round.
Next year, maybe the good
year. Or, yeah.
His stock will
fall, and then you could take him a round or 2 earlier than maybe you usually would, and then he has a stellar season.
Well, and too, it going to depend on, too, a little bit, obviously, what they're going to do with Brock Purdy and when McCaffrey comes back, with his injury. So that could be some factors there. But I do agree with Mikey. It's up and down. So it's like, okay, you draft him high because he's going to maybe have like I always like to say, a chip on his shoulder because he wants to, prove that, he's a great player and that in this last season was just a, fluke. So you got to take those factors into account. What are they going to do with Purdy and how is McCaffrey going to come back?
Yeah,
like that. Sure. That's the key. So
some of the I should probably announce this, and I'll do this for the next one. But the previous winners of the T.Y. Hilton Award, the last couple of years, Dameon Pierce last year, 2023 winner, and then Kyle Pitts in 2022. So if Kyle Pitts is in this conversation next year, we might have to name the award after him. Kyle Pitts, who 13 games, finished 16th. I get that there's not enough tight ends in the world either, but at some point you got to try a different tight end, right? Like, I mean, and honestly, to my detriment, Mark Andrews was terrible the first 5 weeks or whatever it was, and I dropped him, and so I need to find something else. And luckily, I ended up finding someone else. Maybe if I would have picked up someone else, it would have been a different story. But at some point, you just got to be like, man, all right, Kyle Pitts, I've had it.
Well,
and I don't know if it's like you go 2 or 3 games, he hasn't done anything, and then in that 3rd or 4th game, he does something. All right, I got him. He's in the offense now because you have a new quarterback, and they're really trying to figure things out. Like, okay, they figured it out. And he goes a couple more weeks without points, and then in that 3rd or 4th week, he does it again. You're just like, well, I guess I'm just riding this train to the end of the station.
Well,
always tough.
Well, and two, if anything with Kyle Pitts, yes, I mean we might have to change the T.Y. Hilton Award to the Kyle Pitts Award, but just for rally purposes, if I'm Kyle Pitts, I need to go somewhere else. I need a fresh start because I'm just not like maybe that might help in fantasy purposes. I would say, you know what, Atlanta, I'm out. Like
I just don't think he's good.
But
based on I haven't seen every game he's ever played, but there's moments where he doesn't get to the sticks when he's supposed to. He's dropping balls. I just don't know if he's that good.
But do you think? I don't know. But do you think maybe a change of scenery?
Well, didn't we think? Well, this year was supposed to be a change of scenery. They brought
Kirk
Cousins exactly. Like we all said at the beginning of the year, it's like if he can't do it this year, now Kirk Cousins was eventually benched, but he played a good portion of the season still, and he still wasn't productive.
But I think too, a change of scenery, maybe does help.
I don't know. Kirk Cousins was a good. Now he didn't have a great year, so I'm not going to put it on Kyle Pitts, but. I just don't know if he's that good. Anyway.
Okay.
Some of the other guys I had on my list, Jake Ferguson, he was started 10 times, finished 26th. Tank Dell, we kind of talked about, amongst us talked about, started 11 times. He finished 49th. So that's some of the other names there as well. All right, so congratulations, I guess. I don't know if T.O. Samuel wants this award, but he is the T.Y. Hilton Award winner this week. All right, let's go on to the next one, the worst move of the year. In terms of how this, we kind of look at all factors. We look at if you drafted somebody, if you traded somebody, if you picked someone up off a free agent, maybe it's someone that you put in your lineup that you shouldn't have put in. The worst move can consist anything, really. And so the candidates, the last couple of winners. So in 2022, Najee Harris drafted third over. Look at Todd. You can hear him. Todd Diamond, the Butterfingers, drafted Najee Harris third overall and was not good. In 2023, NWA drafted a couple of quarterbacks in the second or third round, didn't trade either one of them. So what are the candidates here this season? Well, we'll start things off here with good old Brandon Ayuk, who Todd will talk about, I'm sure. So the number 3, or I should say one of the candidates is Todd Diamond. He drafted Brandon Ayuk in the 3rd, Zamir White in the 4th, and Deontay Johnson in the 6th. And if that doesn't make you cringe just hearing that, then I don't know what else will. We also saw the Lemonheads, who didn't play Jared Goff in the quarterfinals of the MHA playoffs. Goff ended up having 89 points on his bench. That dumb owner. What's the matter with him? And then Belt Sanders, he drafted Miles Sanders in the 7th round, started him once in week 9, and Sanders was not good here this season. So those are the candidates for worst move of the year, and the winner is the Lemonheads, who didn't play Jared Goff in the quarterfinal matchup. I don't like to look at these things because at some point when you're not in it, maybe you're not in it. But if I would have played Goff and kept my best lineup, I could have won the championship. I don't like looking at that stuff. Yes. But honestly, I would have had enough points to beat Joe if I would have played. No, I would have beaten Eaton W's. Who did I play in the first? No, CUP.
Yeah,
I played CUP. I would have beaten him if I would have played Goff. And just based on the starters I don't know how my defense would have played. But if I would have just played the team I had in there, I would have beaten Mikey after. Would it have been you after that?
You would have beaten Joe.
I would have beaten Joe, and then I would have beaten Mikey. But that didn't happen, so maybe that compounds it a little bit. So I think it was Kevin who goes, well, why'd you do that? And I was like, well, that's a tough situation, right? Like, you always think, and I mentioned this on the podcast, so I hate to reiterate myself, but it was even that morning, like an hour before game time, I was able to sit. I got everything I needed done so I could just focus on football. And I was like, man, I don't know. I mean, the over-under in that, what was it, Lions and Bills game was like 52. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a lot of points. But, I mean, Tua was so good and really saved my season in a lot of way. And then, like, the last 4 or 5 weeks, he had 50-plus points. Mm-hmm. And so my thought process was, this is part of the process. This is not what made the final decision, but it's almost how worse would I feel if I didn't play Goff, mm-hmm. or if I didn't play Tua, played Goff, who had multiple weeks of 30 under 40 points, and then Tua would have had 50 or 60. I would have felt stupid or even more worse off.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever that's the case may be, but it did not work that way.
Well, and two, I mean, you had 2 quarterbacks that could put up, put up 50 plus points anytime. But I don't know. I mean, personally, I would have just stick with Goff all the way through and through, regardless of what Tua was doing, because Goff was the one, at least for most of the season, at least for first part of the season, got you where you needed to go. And yes, Goff kind of had.
That's not how that went. Goff hurt me in the beginning. That's why I was off to such a bad start. Because Goff, at the beginning of the year, had a couple of good games here and there, but he had some 30-point weeks. And so at some point, Tua came back from injury because I didn't have the option to even use Tua. He was on my IL for a long time, or IR. What is it for football? I always forget.
IR.
Between baseball and football, I always forget. Anyway, he was on my IR bench. And so at some point he comes back. He had a good matchup. Let me roll with him. And he actually got me into the playoffs. If I would have went Goff the whole year, I probably would have missed the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, Detroit was
run heavy.
Well, they were run heavy, but they were also blowing people out. And so there was no need for Goff to go off in all these games.
You didn't do much in that second half, right? When you're up 30-5, 7 or 10 or something. But
so and it kind of just worked out in that game too, where David Montgomery got hurt in the very first couple plays, and so they didn't have him either. So they kind of had to move to going pass heavy, and
they fell behind early.
Game
script. It's easy to say second, looking back and but I mean, I knew at that time when I was making the decision, I was like, well, I'm going to roll with Tua, because if he does great and Jared Goff turns into another 30-point pumpkin, I'd have felt worse about it. But that's just how it goes. So there's that. I mean, we talked about Miles Sanders. We were all kind of surprised at the draft that went down anyway, and I think that worked out worse than I think Alan probably thought it was going to. And then Todd and his Brandon Ayuk and Zamir White, Deontay Johnson. That's a tough 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, I mean, and that, I mean, those 3 players, 4, 5, and 6, contributed 48 points on the season to Todd's team, and Ayuk had 43 of those. So,
well, that's why I'm going to save all my effigies and expletives for when we talk about bust about Brandon Ayuk. So
Zamir White, you might for the season. Deontay Johnson gave you 4 points, so it wasn't
4 points. And then he was eventually traded, right?
He was traded. He was cut.
And then he was cut.
Yeah.
Man, oh man, Todd.
Yeah, not the
tough draft.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, anything else we want to say about that before should we go to the best move of the year? Are we good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Right, best move of the year. So let's get off some of negativity.
Yeah.
And reward owners for their great moves. Best move of the year, 2022 winner. We saw Gonzo Cats pick up Gardner Minshew, that worked against yours truly in the playoffs, who ended up having 50 points after his Jalen Hurts got hurt. Picked him up and did well and ended my season, although that was also a lot of Cam Akers too, but I digress. 2023 winner, Kilgore Trout's free agent pickup of Puka Nacua, who would go on and have an incredible season 1 year ago. So what are the candidates this season for the best move of the year? And we'll start things off with the Lemonhead once again. They picked up tight end Jonnu Smith. We talked about the Tua move. Well, that helped out. We talked about Mark Andrews kind of hurting the Lemonheads and dropped him. And, of course, Andrews ended up having a great second half of the year. But Jonnu Smith came in and was spectacular. Another best move of the year candidate, how about Kilgore Trout putting in a couple of wide receivers in his championship? Mikey, remind me, T. Higgins
and Courtland
Sutton, despite having Cooper Kupp. And who was his other guy on the bench?
Garrett
Wilson, yeah. And so we kind of talked about that before in the podcast. Maybe we talked about it off air. But it was just like, it's just funny on paper how that kind of looked and so forth. And then the last one here is the Hot Tamales drafting Saquon Barkley. Maybe a little bit of surprise in that first round. So those are your candidates, Saquon, Jonnu Smith, and a couple of wide receivers for Kilgore Trout. And the winner is going to be the Hot Tamales and Saquon Barkley. And I feel like those who listen to the broadcast religiously, Aaron, we know you are out there watching religiously. We love you. We appreciate you. He was here today hanging out with us for the Bronco game. But every week on the podcast, Saquon was amazing. And so, and we've talked about this before in terms of, when Mikey made that pick in the first round, there was some oohs and ahs. I don't think anybody was like, what an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, for you to ride that Saquon train all the way to the championship, thoughts. I mean, was Saquon the guy right out of the gate? Did you know at that once that previous pick was made, like, oh, this is it, or was there still some thought after that?
So, it was basically going into the draft. I was looking at how the picks before me were trying to go. I always think about where can I get an advantage, and we kind of knew that this year was more of looking like to be the year of the receiver as far as the first round goes. There were a lot of guys that were going early. Tyreek Hill went early. CeeDee Lamb went early. Amon-Ra I think went right before me, and
correct.
I would only can assume that most people probably figured I would land on, Jefferson or Chase. It was something that we talked about, and I had said, turns out I was wrong, but I had said Jefferson over Chase, which is what happened in the draft, but it wasn't me taking him. For me, I knew what kind of player Saquon was, And I just always look at the success that running backs have had in Philadelphia. I mean, you talk about what Miles Sanders was and what he is now, and then last year what DeAndre Swift, was in Philadelphia, which he was incredible last year. And I just felt like behind that offensive line, more of a complete team, it was worth the chance of taking him and just having him go off, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, Barkley. So at that time, in the draft, it was McCaffrey first, running back, Tyreek Hill, wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, Breece Hall, running back, Bijan Robinson, running back, then Amon-Ra St. Brown. But yeah, I mean, it was one of those moves where Barkley on a different planet. And for someone, I've had him a couple times, and he's disappointed. Like, he had a good, okay year, but one of the years I picked him up, and the other year I think he was just injured for a good portion of it. But man, there was just something about Barkley this year. He's actually he's not on the TV now; it's commercial, but he's playing right now in that playoff game, and he's a big reason why. Even with Jalen Hurts maybe not having his best year, he didn't need to. Saquon in that offense was tremendous. Mike, you were talking about Jonnu Smith after I picked him up. He was one of the best tight ends in terms of scoring the rest of the way, and so for him to didn't make me look like a total fool because, I mean, Mark Andrews was pretty incredible after that. Jonnu was still better, so it was still better for me to pick him up over Mark Andrews. But I was so frustrated. I've been frustrated with Mark Andrews in the past. And, it's always frustrating, but I didn't, pick him in the third or fourth round. I think it was, fifth or sixth round. But Jonnu Smith really kind of stepped up to the plate, was really that benefit. Those two, that combination of Tua and Jonnu Smith helped me out 1 week because of overtime and what they were able to do. And they had, I don't remember what the point total was. It was something like 24, 25 points. They were able to get me into overtime and help me win that matchup. But yeah, Jonnu Smith was pretty incredible this year.
Yeah, I mean, in the 6 weeks that you had him after picking him up, that you played him, he averaged about 16 points a game, which, we talk about it all the time, how, I know Todd plays tight end roulette all the time. And,
yeah. So much fun.
Tight ends, it's hard finding, that good, consistent tight end. Like Brock Bowers was one that was really good this year. I'm sure we'll talk about him later. But, yeah, and to have it happen at the right time. Like, you were a team that was, struggling, that you probably thought, hey, I'm probably not going to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, big time.
And to have that sort of advantage at that position, that was a big key for you to get in.
And, yeah, for sure. And then Kilgore Trout, putting in those wide receivers. It's a great move. I don't think it was a surprise move as what we were talking about, to have those two guys, to see Cooper Kupp and Garrett Wilson, guys he drafted in the, second and third rounds. And then, but they weren't hot. Though the other two guys, T. Higgins and remind me again.
Well, T. Higgins and Courtland
Sutton. Those, you wouldn't think those guys are top of the line, but they were hot. And they both did really well against Mikey in the championship game, which is obviously a big thing, too, to be able to pop that in. So kudos to all the owners for making great moves. Some of the other ones we talked about, at least, Todd and I both agree, Bucky Irving, 14th round. I should have played him during the quarterfinals. I didn't either because he burned me the previous week. We talked about Chuba Hubbard, who was drafted in the 9th round by Kilgore, as a really great move. We kind of talked about J.K. Dobbins, Kilgore picking him up. It wouldn't have made the biggest difference, right, in the whole spectrum because he beat you by so much. But it was just funny at that time to see that kind of work in the other direction.
Well, and I will say, had Aaron made the playoffs, I would have had Jahmyr Gibbs, getting traded from Todd over to Aaron.
100%.
Had he made the playoffs, that would have been on my list. But
Jahmyr Gibbs move, really, really true.
I would say that'll at least be one thing next week when we do what we were right about and what we were wrong about. I was right about Jahmyr Gibbs, even though he didn't.
Except you traded him away
for Aaron Jones.
Your boy.
Yes, but I'm still gonna put that. I'm gonna still check that off as I was right on that.
Okay. Well, we'll talk more about that when we were right and where we were wrong on next week's episode, whenever that episode's going to be. We're not on a schedule right now. We're just kind of going when we have time. Eric's crazy, stupid busy these days. Let's go to the next award, our comeback player of the year. A couple of winners from the past couple of years, 2022, Saquon Barkley, who was not on my team that season. In 2023, DJ Moore, one of Mikey's favorites for sure. Here are the nominations for Comeback Player of the Year. Well, we got Joe Burrow. He finished number 1 after an injury-plagued 2023. He ended up finishing 24th. After it's all said and done, Josh Jacobs. He finished 5th amongst running backs this season after finishing 28th on my team. Last year in 2023, he played in 13 games. And how about Terry McLaurin having a fantastic season this year after finishing 29th one season ago? And so the winner of the 2024 MHA Comeback Player of the Year is Josh Jacobs. And so, of course, Mikey had Josh Jacobs on his team, finished 5th amongst all running backs. Mikey just knew it was coming, right? After his just terrible 2023 season, he goes to a better team, but not like Saquon better team, but he went to a team that, and you can explain to me, but I mean, it was just, I wouldn't say it's a lateral move, but I mean, because we saw Josh Jacobs have success 2 years ago with the Raiders and then didn't have a good year. As a high draft pick for me, maybe I'm just bitter. I'm just sounding bitter through the microphone right now.
You're just...
but then he ends up having a great year and finishing 5th. So just talk about some of your thoughts on why you picked him and why you saw it coming, I guess.
So he's always been a high yardage back. So, I figure I'd get, decent yardage points from him. The big difference for me is, the difference in teams. So, I mean, the Raiders are a team that has no quarterback, that's terrible, that doesn't, get down the field a lot. I think I was in Todd's camp a lot, and a lot of people's camp that saw the way that Green Bay finished last year with Jordan Love and thought that Jordan Love was going to be really good this year. And I just felt like there was opportunity in there for him as for touchdown equity. A lot better offense. If Jacobs, if could turn that around and have a decent amount of touchdowns, then his point total was just going to skyrocket. Figured he was going to get the yards. I was hoping he would get the touchdowns, and he did.
Oh, 100%. 16 total touchdowns for Josh Jacobs this year between rushing and receiving. 36 receptions on top of that. 1,300 yards on the ground, and to be able to finish in the top. I mean, Mikey had 3 of the top, 5 between Barkley, Henry, and Jacobs. Obviously was huge, but for him to kind of step up in that regard is massive. We talked about Joe Burrow. Another guy Mikey almost had on his team. Just imagine if he would have had him too on his team to go along with those 3 running backs. But Joe obviously rode him to a championship, so having him come back, and there was a lot of questions because it didn't look like he was healthy the last couple of years. We've seen him put together top-notch numbers. But, to go in, I don't remember what quarter. Let's see. I'll do it real quick. So you talk about third. He was the 4th quarterback taken. So there was a lot of expectations there in that, but he came through. And then Terry McLaurin, someone I've never been a fan. Obviously, that's no surprise on this podcast. It's scary Terry McLaurin. And I knew that he was getting a new quarterback this year. I just didn't think that it would make that big of a difference. And he was amazing. What did he finish 9th in our league? Let me see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th. 213 points, 82 receptions, 13 touchdowns. It's still hard to believe that Terry McLaurin had 13 touchdowns. But Jade McDaniel, came in. I mean, I'm looking over Terry's stats. He had, 14 touchdowns over the past 3 years, and he had 13 this year alone. I mean, he's always put up decent numbers in terms of he's had around 80 receptions, 75 to 80 receptions. He's had over 1,000 yards in the last 5 seasons, but his touchdowns were never there. So I was not high on him as compared to someone else. And this year he got the touchdowns, and it just goes to show how much a quarterback can help you out. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always who you attach, for wide receivers, who are you attached to. And obviously Jaden Daniels this year, and we'll probably talk about maybe in later on in the other podcast, but it definitely helped. It definitely helped McLaurin out a lot. Having a quarterback who's capable of getting the football to you, it's always a good. That's last time I checked. That's a good thing.
Anything you want to say, Miguel? Any other candidates that you thought should be in the conversation of comeback player of the year?
Well, I mean, McLaurin, I loved that pick of it just because it was, he was never like the consistent guy. I think it was always something me and you would see, like, why is he rated so high?
Yeah.
Like, this doesn't make sense. Like, year after year, he's rated so high, and then he never lives up to it. And this is the year where, Jaden Daniels, it tells you how good he was, where he actually, lived up to that potential. So he was.
Yeah.
Did I call him McDaniels?
You did
I
call
did
him
call him
McDaniels.
McDaniels. I knew when I said it, like, that doesn't sound right.
Maybe it's
but
because Washington has that Jeremy McNichols, so you're like mixing them together.
perhaps, but probably not, because I didn't know
Nichols
that's
and
who that
Daniels
was.
equals McDaniels.
McDaniels.
Or maybe you're a big fan of Josh McDaniels.
Maybe we're just having McDonald's for dinner tonight. I have no idea.
So, you never know.
No. We always have to say it's not McDaniels. It's douchebag McDaniels.
Josh McDaniels, yes.
It's
He ends
douchebag.
up in the podcast somehow.
Yeah.
So there you go. Your comeback player of the year is Josh Jacobs. What a season. Let's go to our most surprising player. Mikey, what does that mean, the most surprising player?
So it's kind of came out of nowhere,
Yeah.
It wasn't somebody that, we had tabbed necessarily during our, pre-shows or, wasn't on a lot of high up on rankings and wasn't drafted relatively high. It just came and, boom, showed the league, hey, I'm here.
Yeah, it's
I'm him.
we should call the award the Peyton Hillis Award for the most surprising.
Maybe we're pretty bland on the most surprising player.
So,
Peyton Hillis, what year was that?
2010.
That was your first year in the league. Picked up Peyton Hillis, and he rode him to a championship. Maybe we do that next
Todd's
year.
doing fist pumps over there.
Yeah.
Thinking about the good old days. Huh?
I know, right?
So some of the winners in the past, 2022, Kenneth Walker was the most surprising player of the year. And how about last year, Raheem Mostert, who scored more than 20 points one season ago. Well, here are the candidates for this year's most surprising player. What are we doing over here? We're playing with Pringles containers. We're stacking them. All right. Keep in the game. I love the competition here. Eaton W's Chase Brown, the Bengals running back who was drafted in the 10th round. He finished 10th amongst all running backs, at least the last time I looked it up. I could probably update that here as we go along. We talked about Brock Bowers, also Eaton W's. He was also, well, that can't be right. How are they both drafted in the 10th round by Eaton W's? Something must be wrong there. I have to look that up. Mikey, check out where I went wrong. But Brock Bowers, tight end, finished number 1 amongst all tight ends. And then Chuba Hubbard from Kilgore Trout. He was drafted in the 9th round. And he would finish, I don't have that number in front of me for whatever reason, but I'll get back to you on that. Mikey, go ahead.
So Chase Brown was actually round 9.
Round 9.
Brock Bowers was round 10.
There you have it. And then, as we're playing with the Pringle bottles, dancing over there, bottles, containers, Chuba Hubbard would end up finishing, I don't know why he's not on this list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13th. He would finish 13th in 15 games. So he probably didn't play the last couple of games of the season, but he was still tremendous. So, once again, the candidates for the most surprising player is Chuba Hubbard, Brock Bowers, and Chase Brown. And the winner goes to Chuba Hubbard from Kilgore Trout. Of course, that was obviously a huge pick, even though it almost came back to hurt him because he ended up not playing in the championship game due to an injury. But what he did this season was incredible. Mikey was talking about it a little bit before, but, I mean, he was putting up elite numbers for a good portion of the season. He only had 4 games all season where he had under 10, and 2 of those were 8s. So for what he was able to do, especially in the playoffs, he had a 31-point game in the semifinal round. And so, so in terms of just, were we surprised to see Chuba Hubbard? Yes, I think we were. Were we, Miguel?
Absolutely. And you almost have to wonder, if you are G in the NWA and you took Jonathan Brooks in round 6 and you're just like, man, like what happened? Like you knew the guy was injured going in. And, Chuba Hubbard was probably going to be the starter in Carolina, but I think a lot of us just probably thought like, well, it's Carolina, so,
Right.
Yeah.
they're terrible. Bryce Young's terrible. Nothing's going to happen. And I forgot to even mention Miles Sanders was drafted too. So those 2 Carolina running backs that were taken before, Chuba Hubbard. He was decent. I remember last year, and I don't remember if I'm wrong. I think
I'm
maybe
looking at his stats
Aaron
right now.
had him last year,
Oh,
but he was decent down the stretch,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, still you just thought, he's
Yeah,
Hubbard,
you're
nothing
just
big.
yeah.
And yeah, he exploded. Like that was the Carolina offense. It was, they kept switching in and out quarterbacks between, Bryce Young and Andy Dalton, but the one consistent on that team was Hubbard, especially at the goal line.
Yeah, last year Hubbard finished 27, so of course not going to raise any eyebrows. But from week 6 to 18, he averaged 19 touches a game and 77 total yards per game. And so he was massive down the stretch. Only had 5 touchdowns, so of course that doesn't jump out at you either. But when given the opportunity, and of course you draft that highly touted running back, and you're like, well, here's my chance. If he's not ready to play, I need to be ready to play, and then try to win that job. And obviously that helped out Kilgore Trout immensely to be able to come through. Brock Bowers was second, and we were joking. I was like, how often do you see a tight end come from nowhere to be the number 1 tight end? And Mikey, when was the last time it happened? Last year. I didn't even Sam Laporta. No kidding. Yeah, I guess that happens. I mean, that's the state of tight ends. I don't know.
But what makes it also very surprising too is the fact he's a rookie. The Brock Bowers,
Was Sam Laporta not a rookie?
Yeah, he was.
I think he was.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's really scary, as good as Brock Bowers was this year, he did that with Aiden O'Connell and whatever garbage was in Las Vegas. And so now, who knows what the Raiders situation is going to be going forward. I don't know if they have a clear-cut plan, and they're the Raiders, so they're going to find a way to manage to mess it up, I'm sure.
Well, yeah,
but it just shows the level of what he could be. If you put
a quarterback, a real quarterback in, in that system. But yeah,
Or, and this is probably going off the subject, or is it because they didn't have, Jacoby Myers is their best wide receiver, and the quarterback is not good. That's who they're going to throw it to more times than not. But at some point as a defense, you recognize that and try to double team him, and he still was able to put up
numbers.
First overall tight end numbers. He was breaking Mike Ditka records, for crying out loud. He would end up finishing with 112 receptions, just over 1,100 yards receiving. 5 touchdowns is a little low, but that's just because it's the Raiders. So depending on what happens last year, that could only get better. Ended up, what did he end up here? Just 8, 9, 10, 11 more points than the number 2 guy in Trey McBride. But Brock Bowers, I've had him in a different league, and he was pretty amazing, especially when ours PPR league. And he didn't put up as many touchdowns as some, but he put up 112 receptions. That's crazy. Wild stuff, to say the least. And Chase Brown, Mikey, he was a guy that you were like kind of a sleeper on. And he was great this year.
He was, and he fell only because nobody really knew what was going to happen with that Cincinnati backfield. Zach Moss was the guy at the beginning of the season, and Chase Brown was more of like third down back role, but you kind of got to see, once Moss was injured and out of there, and, Chase Brown got to take over that full-time role, like they got to see what he was, and he down the stretch was amazing. Like he was putting up round 1, round 2 type numbers, for eating W's down the stretch. And so, yeah, while I thought he could be a sleeper, like surprising to me was the type of numbers that he was putting up, close to 20 points a game, which is just nuts.
Yeah, he only had – so he started off a little slow. Coach, you're trying to figure things out with Zach Moss, 4 points, 3 points, raised to 8, and then 22, 16, 13, had a 6 in there, but 11, 24, 19, 16, then just had a 25 a burger, and then in the 15th week of the season. So, yeah, your most surprising players, Hubbard, Bowers, and Chase Brown. Pretty incredible stuff. Just some other guys. I had Terry McLaurin because I was super surprised to hear about that. We mentioned Baker Mayfield, but NWA only started him 3 times. He finished 3rd, and so where's Baker Mayfield? Well, he wasn't started as much. So he didn't play a huge enough factor in the MHA to really kind of be in that mix. We talked about Brian Thomas from Kilgore Trout. I had Jaden Daniels, who was a 12th round pick. He was kind of split between the Brock Bowers and with Todd over there at that quarterback. So just some of the other guys we talked about.
Well, and I just want to give some quick love to Brian Thomas Jr. too, just because, when we talked about rookie receivers like, Malik Neighbors getting love, Roma Dunze, Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously, and then, even Xavier Worthy, and Brian Thomas Jr. may be the best of the bunch on a really bad team with no quarterback, which was pretty shocking.
4th. Yeah. He finished 4th amongst our wide receivers. So 87 receptions, 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns on a bad offense. Kilgore Trout again, by the way.
Yeah.
So when we talked about it, because one of our board bets is who would be the number 1 rookie wide receiver, all of us were wrong.
Wrong.
All of us were wrong.
Wrong.
So there's that. Okay, we go down to our last 2 categories here, gentlemen. Let's go into the bust of the year. Oh, dude, Todd's got his hands. He's ready to talk. He's ready to get into this.
I'm ready to just tear into. Yeah, let's continue. But
I love it. Bust of the year. This is one I like talking about because it's guys who we think are going to be great, or we have this visual idea, and they totally let you down. And it almost hurts worse because, like, when you're right, you're like, yeah, of course I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to be right. But when you're wrong, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so painful. So a couple of the couple of winners from the last couple of years. How about Alvin Kamara in 2022? Good old Alvin Kamara. And then last year, Austin Eckler. So a couple of running backs. Do we have any running backs in this nominations? Well, let's find out who they are. Nominations for Bust of the Year. How about we talked about him? Sam Laporta, number 1 tight end 1 season ago. Not the number 1 tight end. I think he finished 10th. You said he finished in the top 10.
He did, just given his last couple weeks were playoff weeks, but during the season was awful.
He's in the mix. How about Tyreek Hill from NWA, the 2nd overall pick? He finished 19th amongst all wide receivers, 5 10-point games, and then 8 games under 10. And he played in 16 games this season. And our final candidate is a duo candidate, same team, Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Yep, you can hear it. You can hear it in the headset. Todd is ready to talk about it. So the winner of the 2024 MHA Bust of the Year is Tyreek Hill. But I will let Todd talk about Ayuk. If you want to incorporate Deebo, we would appreciate it.
Yes.
But yeah, number 3 on that. So with Tyreek, Laporta, and then Ayuk, Deebo. But yeah, go ahead. Let it go, Todd. Here's your stage. Here's your platform.
Woosah. Okay.
Woosah.
Brandon Ayuk sucks royally. Okay, they paid him $120 million. What in God's name? I'm gonna read off his points for the week before he got injured. But we got 3 fellas, 3. We got 6. I thought, okay, he's just trying. He
doubled him up.
He doubled up a little bit. Okay, then we got 7. I'm like, all right, we're cooking with gas. We got this. Then we go to 4. I'm like, what the hell? Then 15. I'm like, okay, this is where he turns the corner. Then what does he do, fellas? You're gonna have to just bleep this one out. 3 fucking points. Are you kidding me with that? Ayuk. I hope that $120 million is keeping him warm at night because it's straight garbage. And again, we talked about this before. Was it the 49ers offense just not getting him the football enough? Because I knew McCaffrey coming back was definitely going to take away catches and targets. I get that. I perfectly fine with that. But Ayuk cried like a little baby, wanted his money. The 49ers gave him his bottle and his money. Okay. And I thought too, I was like, well, he doesn't have that chip on his shoulder because that helped me win a championship last year. But the point is, Ayuk sucks, and I don't know what, and I don't know why they were trying to get him the ball enough. Because obviously, when McCaffrey got hurt, I'm like, okay, this is when Ayuk is just going to step up. They're going to force feed him the ball like it's nobody's business. They didn't do any of that, and then he ends up getting hurt. Now, granted, I traded him.
You did. You were so frustrated. You had to get him out.
I just had to do it. But I was so high on Ayuk, and yeah. So and then Deebo is interesting because Deebo can be frustrating in some cases where, when he does have a great game, you're like, oh my God, like he rushes, he catches everything you want, and he's literally a running back too, because the way they find ways to get him the ball, and that's why I was trying to figure out why they weren't trying to do that with Ayuk a little bit once McCaffrey went down. Like, hey, let's get him more involved and everything like that, and those were going to Juwan Jennings too, whoever the hell that is, but.
The best 49ers wide receiver.
Yeah, well,
outside of Kittle.
But the point is, both of them just total busts. I mean, just so it was gross. And Ayuk I thought was going to be the guy, but apparently not. So Ayuk, you on the blacklist. You done, son. You done. You done. You done. You done. I hope you, I hope you. I hope that $120 million is gonna make you happy because it didn't make me happy.
How much is it Brock Purdy's fault? Because you talk about both of these guys. Ayuk finished 15th amongst wide receivers last year. Deebo Samuel was 13th. So to be able to put up 2 wide receivers in the top 15, and Brock was nowhere near what he was last year. You want to say anything about it? The only thing I'll say about it is I knew he's not a big completion quarterback. Now he dealt with some injuries this year, but he still played a majority.
Yeah.
But if the touchdowns don't work, and touchdowns can be fluky, we talk about it all the time, and they did not go his way. Now you lose McCaffrey, and maybe they take some of the aspect out of it, but you're built for – the 49ers missed the playoffs. They're not in the playoffs right now. And so whether it was Brock Purdy, whether it was Christian McCaffrey, that whole team suffered. And defensively, they weren't the 49ers that we've seen in the past either. So maybe it was just a bad year for the 49ers and bad year for everything. Unless you're George Kittle.
Yeah. George Kittle looked like he was doing just fine in that offense. But, yes, I mean, Purdy wasn't his best year. And yes, he's not a big completion person, but just again, what irks me was the fact that Ayuk wanted top elite wide receiver money. He thought he was up there with the Jamar Chase and the Justin Jeffersons of the world, okay? And he went to the 49ers and said, "Listen, I'm, look at my stats and look at what I can do and look at how important I am when I am on the field." And the 49ers at first were kind of like, well, hold on a second. I know, we want to pay you, but we don't want to pay you, elite money. Held out for most of training camp. And then right before close to the season, what did the 49ers do? They paid him. They gave him what he wanted. So, again, was it do I blame it on both sides with Ayuk not playing up to what they paid him, and also the 49ers not finding other ways to get him the football? Yes, but it's still.
But he's blacklisted.
He's blacklisted. He's blacklisted. I mean,
Mikey, do you want to say anything about it, or do you want to talk about Sam Laporta?
I'll talk about Sam Laporta.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like going into the season, most thought that he was going to be the top tight end, coming off an incredible rookie season, a lot of touchdowns, and then this year, I mean, I'm sure Miles will tell you, he was just terrible. Like, he was looking for other options because at points he wasn't playable, and I think he went to Tucker Kraft at one point, the tight end from Green Bay. It's hard to say what went wrong there, other than we talked about earlier Detroit being up a lot in games and Goff not having to throw as much, and Laporta kind of became like maybe a 4th or 5th option because they had the 2 running backs. They had Amon-Ra St. Brown. They finally had Jamison Williams in there for almost a full season. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Laporta maybe just fell in the pecking order, but, I mean, he just did not offer up a lot.
It feels like a huge fall.
Yeah, I mean, in the games that he played for, Chad Powers fan club, he played 9 games. He had a total of 55 points in those 9 games that he played. That was an average of 6 points per game. And so, for being that top tight end option, it just was not good.
Yeah. I mean, I had him, looking back at my rankings, I had him number 1. I think a lot of people had him number 1. And it went bad. It went south quickly. And even despite them being a very largely rushing team last year, having Amon-Ra St. Brown, maybe the Jamison Williams thing was the thing that kind of tilted it in the wrong direction for Laporta, but definitely a fall that a lot. I mean, I was definitely not expecting to go that, but tight ends too, tough situation. And we kind of talked about Tyreek Hill already. A guy, and I give credit to NWA. That was his number 1 pick, number 2 overall, and he still was on the verge of making the playoffs if things went right for him. And so not to have your number 1 pick, I'm going to say he didn't have him. He just wasn't as number 1. The year before. I mean,
he was out on the field.
17, right. He was out there, but he wasn't putting up 1,700 yards and 13 touchdowns or whatever it was he had the year before. But, I mean, Tua being hurt, but even when he came, he wasn't putting up legit number. He had a couple of okay weeks, but he wasn't anywhere near. And I think that is always tough to put in that bust situation, but it did cost NWA the playoffs in some respects. And yeah, I mean, I think that's all we really have to say. We knew he wasn't Tyreek Hill last year. Now he wants out of Miami. He's a very volatile individual. But that's a story for another day, I guess. But to finish 19th amongst all wide receivers after being a second-round pick, reason for bust of the year. Some other guys we kind of talked about. We talked about Jalen Waddle. We talked a lot of time about Waddle. He finished 50th. 50th. Yeah, that's twice. You have to like click on the top 25 or whatever, right, to be able to find where he finished. Chris Olave, that's just more. He was drafted in the 4th round. He didn't do much of anything. He was hurt, but he also, when he was around, didn't do much anything. We talked about Michael Pittman, who was 4th round, finished 53rd. He had a bad year amongst it as well. And
Jalen Hurts was the other one.
Yeah, and that was one of my top guys. And for Aaron, who drafted him in the 3rd round, finished 16th amongst quarterbacks. Average about 40 points a game. Thanks, Saquon, right? If you're Aaron, I guess, at this point. But he was one. We talked about Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he finished 6th overall, but he wasn't Patrick Mahomes where he was drafted in the 1st round.
He got hot late.
Yes. So he raised that number a little bit. Breece Hall, he finished 18th amongst running backs. He was a 1st-round pick for Eaton W's. DK Metcalf I put just because I'm always high on him, and he finished 35th. And one, of course, I want to talk about is Marvin Harrison Jr., but we'll talk about that now next week's show. All right, so we're almost an hour. So we've been doing a pretty good job just winging this. We're pretty good at this podcasting, I would say. But before we leave, we got to talk about the MHA MVP award. And so the conversation we had before is MHA MVP or NFL MVP? Like, what's the difference? And like, well, it's really who mattered in our league and who stood out and who finished above everyone else and helped them tremendously. And so some of the we'll just go to the candidates for actually the couple of winners the last couple of years. In 2022, it was Travis Kelce for Tamales, right? I think he was on your team. And then 2023 winner Christian McCaffrey, who was on your team. So did I get it this year? No, I didn't get it this year.
Nice.
But the 3 candidates we have here, of course, Saquon Barkley. We've talked him up quite a bit on the show here today for Hot Tamales, who was drafted in the 1st round. Joe Burrow, of course. Kilgore Trout's quarterback, who was just tremendous here this season. He finished 1st overall, drafted in the 4th round. And then Lamar Jackson for the NWA. We talked about him not having Tyreek Hill. Just imagine if Tyreek Hill had the season he was supposed to have, paired up with Lamar Jackson, who's been tremendous. And so the winner of the 2024 MHA Most Valuable Player is going to be Joe Burrow. It was a very tough decision between Burrow and Barkley. And I'll let Mikey kind of talk about it here. Of course, Mike Barkley and Tamales and what he was able to do this year. And every week he's putting 20 to 30 points on the board. We do this vote after the season's over. The NFL does their votes before the playoffs even start. But I think it's important that, a big reason why Burrow, second half of the season, but he also came through against you in the championship when it mattered the most. So I think that plays a huge factor, right?
It does. I mean, and Burrow was somebody that, I voted for over my own player because not just of what he did to me in the championship, I should say, or both games that he played against me, because he scored, over 150 points in the 2 games that he played against me. But down the stretch, like, I have not seen a quarterback do what Burrow did for Joe down the stretch. From week 9 on, he was either – 1st or 2nd most of the time as far as quarterback points go. He had 3 occasions where he put up over 70 points, during the season, 82 in the championship. He was just awesome. I mean, you look at week 9, 66, week 10, 75, 63 in week 11, you say 53 in week 13. Oh, that's a down week.
That's a down week.
Oh, yeah.
Some of these owners would kill for a 53-point week.
Yeah, 63 week 14. And then in the playoffs, 51 week 16, like you're like, okay, it's down. But, yeah, and then the 82 in the championship, which just carried him. Unbelievable. And as good as Saquon was, Saquon is a well-deserving candidate.
Yes.
He had the 4 games over 30 points. Season overall, week 1 to whenever, like, he was more consistent, I would say, because Burrow was not as great during the beginning of the season. But I had to weigh it on, like, what really just made Joe so much better the second half plus the playoffs, and that was Burrow.
And I mentioned it too. I mean, Joe had a great team. I'm not just putting this on Burrow. He had a lot of great players, and you heard it on this podcast today. But Burrow escalated him to have one of the best scoring fantasies ever. Mm-hmm. Now, we had our 2 quarterback system in the early days, but in terms of 1 quarterback scoring, he did it. He broke the record twice in 1 year, and then the record is now in the championship game. Yeah. And so, I mean, that goes a long way. That's heavy-weighted lifting right there.
Well, that just tells you, I mean, of all the great quarterbacks, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Brendan Roethlisberger, and how many points they've put up, in their entire careers for fantasy, Burrow demolished that just in, 1 season, for the most part.
If somebody is putting up, mid-60s to ceiling in the 80s, like, it's almost impossible to catch up to that because it means you're outscoring the quarterback on another team by like 30 points, 40 points.
Yeah.
It's just nuts.
Well, yeah. I mean, even if you combine Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Drew Brees all together, to get what Joe Burrow did and just in this one season.
I mean, that's a great point, Miguel, in terms of quarterback versus quarterback, 30 or 40 points. Barkley to I don't know, just random average running back. That's like 20 to 10 or maybe 30 to 10 or 15, depending on how it goes. So that scoring difference, that margin is so much bigger if the quarterback is that type of quarterback. And it was huge.
Well, and Todd made mention of it, Peyton Manning. And, I mean, it's pretty similar. So, like, Peyton Manning in 2013 was, he was highest scoring quarterback, that we had seen up into that. And it was the same kind of year that year for Peyton Manning where, he had a game over 80. He had 2 other games over in the 70s. He had, in addition to that, 4 other games in the 60s.
Was that his 55 touchdown year?
Yeah, with the Broncos in 2013. Yeah, which was just nuts. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, pretty comparable.
And guess who had Peyton Manning that year?
You did.
Did I win the championship?
No, I don't think you made the playoffs.
Sure didn't. So
man,
maybe this quarterback is not as good as it's supposed to be. No, I'm just kidding.
How bad are you?
How bad was my team?
I mean,
I had that. Wasn't that the same year that on the first weekend he had like 7 or 8 touchdowns or something?
Yeah,
was that a different week?
Baltimore.
He had 87 points in week 1 that year.
Yeah, that was against Baltimore.
So just goes to show.
Exactly.
The rest of my team stunk.
Well, put it this way. At least if anything, I mean, I had one of the weapons on that. From that 2013 record-setting, year. So,
did you win the championship?
Sure did.
Oh, well, there you go. So you benefited from it. I wish I would have. So, yeah, the MVP, Joe Burrow. What a season. Some of the other guys we talked about Bijan Robinson for Cooper's Cousins, who was tremendous, especially as an early-round pick. We talked about Josh Allen. Well, Todd mentioned Josh Allen. Great season from that quarterback. Just unfortunately not on a winning team. But, yeah, so there you go. There's the MHA Awards 2024, and we're about an hour. And so, Todd, what are we going to talk about on next week's show?
Well, we're going to talk about where we went right and where we went wrong. And I went wrong a lot.
I feel like in fantasy football, you're going to be wrong more times than you're right.
Yes.
I feel like it's almost like gambling, right? You probably lose more than you win. Because if you did, we'd all be millionaires. But yeah. So we'll talk about board bets. We'll talk about those guys that we were super high on. We'll talk about some of those rookies. I'm excited to talk about Marvin Harrison. It's one of the things I was incredibly right about. Everybody was shitting on me and telling me I was the one that wasn't on board, wasn't right for not being on board. And while he wasn't a bust, and I never said he was going to be a bust, he was not where most people thought he was going to be.
I think maybe I predicted he might be Rookie of the Year. I mean,
yeah. Mikey, anybody you want to talk about whether you're right or wrong about next week? Something you're excited about?
Well, let's talk about what I'm not excited about because I'm sure that's going to be the Josh Allen conversation.
Oh, yes, it is. We'll talk about some Josh Allen. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Well, perfect. Well, gentlemen, in person, hopefully the audio turns out all right. We can always hear it on the internet, but hopefully everything turns out all right. We'll try to have this out here in the next couple days. We're not sure when we're going to do this next podcast. We might even do a podcast after that. And talk about some things. So if you're interested, want to hear more fantasy, just can't get rid of fantasy football or the MHA or hearing me or us talk, for an hour. We'll have more content coming out. So for Todd Diamond, for Mikey Renault, I'm your host, Eric Lansing. We'll see you next time on the MHA podcast.